YouTube star now? We're all good? Okay. Welcome to Peter White Public Library. My name is Marty Acketts, and I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator here for the library, and I'm also the NEA Big Read Organizer. And tonight, it's my privilege to introduce my friend, writer and Northern Michigan University professor, April Lindala, who will be delivering tonight's keynote address for the NEA Big Read on reclaiming Indigenous voice and vision. But I always like talking a little bit about the speaker. And April and I have known each other for over 25 years as friends, fellow students, and colleagues at NMU. And that means that I have known her almost as long as I've known my wife. And longer than my children have been alive, and my daughter is a junior at Northern Michigan University. So April and I go way, way back. And it's been really exciting to see her flourish as a writer and academic since those early years in the basement of the LRC on campus, right? Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's really changed as well. But anyway, April grew up near Detroit, but moved to Marquette in 1988 to attend Northern Michigan University, and she fell in love with the Upper Peninsula and has made it her home ever since. April earned a Master of Fine Arts degree in English from NMU. She's currently professor of Native American Studies at Northern Michigan University, and April has for over 25 years of experience working with tribal nations and tribal citizens in the Upper Great Lakes region. She served as the director of the NMU Center for Native American Studies for over 13 years, and during that time oversaw the creation of a Native American Studies baccalaureate degree at NMU, which is a huge undertaking. And she shepherded it from the beginning to the first graduating class and beyond. So that's amazing. And that is the first such degree in the state of Michigan. So that's quite an accomplishment. In the past 10 years, April has successfully secured multiple federal grants to develop curriculum connections between Indigenous studies and other academic disciplines. Her portfolio includes 2 awards from the National Endowment for the Arts, who is the sponsor of the NEA Big Read, and 2 awards from the National Science Foundation, and 1 award from the Office of Victims of Crime. April has served the Higher Learning Commission as a peer reviewer and subsequently is interested in exploring ways to indigenize assessment. April began her career at NMU at WNMU Public Broadcasting, where she currently also co-produces and hosts a weekly radio program, Anishinaabe Radio News. She's currently working toward, if that wasn't enough, now she's currently working toward a PhD in Rhetoric, Theory, and Culture from Michigan Technological University in Houghton. I don't know where she has time to sleep, even in all of that. Could you bring me that book that's next to you? I forgot to grab that. April has had several poems published in various anthologies and publications, and she was the project director and assistant editor for the anthology Voice on the Water, Great Lakes Native America, published by the NMU Press, and that book also features 2 of her poems. Before I invite her to come up here, I thought, since we were talking about Joy Harjo, I was going to honor April by reading a poem by Joy Harjo called Honoring. So, honoring. Who sings to the plants that are grown for our plates? Are they gathered lovingly in aprons or arms? Or do they suffer the fate of the motor-driven whip of the monster reaper? No song at all, only the sound of money being stacked in a bank. Who stitched the seams in my clothes, one line after another? Was the room sweaty and dark with no hour to spare? Did she have enough to eat? Did she have a home anywhere? Or did she live on the floor? And where were the children? Or was the seamstress the child? with no home of his or her own? Who sacrifices to make clothes for strangers of another country, and why? Let's remember to thank the grower of food, the picker, the driver, the sun and the rain. Let's remember to thank each maker of stitch and layer of pattern, the dyer of color in the immense house of beauty and pain. Let's honor the maker. Let's honor what's made. Please welcome to Peter White Public Library and for the NEA Big Read, my friend, Professor April Lindala.
Oh my goodness, I'm gonna start crying. That was so amazing. That was like the best introduction ever, to have Joy's words like the red carpet to the stage here. That was amazing. So thank you so much, Marty. To everybody here at Peter White Public Library and those of you watching digitally, welcome. Thank you for joining us and choosing to join us for this event. I absolutely would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge I am a guest here. Since I'm coming from out of the area, I've been a guest here for going on over 30 years. I'm not from Anishinaabe territory. My mother was born and raised on the Grand River Six Nations Reserve in southeast Ontario, but I grew up in and around Detroit. I came up here to go to school, as Marty said, so I'm a guest. This is Anishinaabe territory, and the Anishinaabe have been amazingly generous and kind in their sharing of their wisdom and words and songs with me for the last 30 years, and I could not and would not be where I am without many teachers that have come before me, whether that be in the academic realm or certainly in the tribal community realm. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge that. Thank you again for coming, and like everybody my age, you gotta find the right pair of glasses before I can get going here. So, Kitchi Miigwech, great thank you, as well as congratulations to Marty and everyone here at Peter White for making the Big Read 2-month endeavor, or it's probably even longer than 2 months, this amazing reality, and I feel very honored to be part of an amazing lineup of speakers. Multiple speakers will be joining us from the NMU Center for Native American Studies and the NMU English Department and speaking over the next few weeks, so I'm just thrilled to be a part of this. And let's see, Marty contacted me way back in mid-January, and when he first contacted me and reached out to me, he said to me the theme he was shooting for was reclaiming the past and your ancestors. And knowing Joy's work and knowing also the work of other Indigenous scholars, I was absolutely, I want to be a part of this. Immediately, my thoughts were drawn to a textbook that I teach in one of my classes in Native American Studies. And this textbook is titled Reclaiming Indigenous Voice and Vision. Now, to provide a context of this textbook, it's a very intense compilation of essays born out of an academic retreat of sorts. Over the course of 10 days in 1996, a number of Indigenous scholars met at the University of Saskatchewan. Marie Batiste, who's Mi'kmaq, is the editor, and she says about this gathering in her introduction, the group came together to seek remedies for the colonization of the minds and souls of their peoples. This evening, I seek to weave together excerpts of Joy Harjo's words from An American Sunrise with words from the multiple scholars represented in Reclaiming Indigenous Voice and Vision, and humbly add my own thoughts pertaining to this notion of reclamation. I want to start with a poem from American Sunrise, An American Sunrise, entitled, actually this is from what looked to be an interview, not Joy's work, but an interview from 1937, entitled The Road to Disappearance. Now I have Kindle, so I apologize. I believe it is on page 36 and 37 for those who have the book. The Indians will vanish has been the talk of the older Indians ever since the white people first came to mingle among them. They seemed to prophesy that the coming of the white man would not be for their good, and when the step toward their removal to a country to the west was just beginning, it was the older Indians who remarked and talked about themselves by saying, "Now, the Indian is now on the road to disappearance." This had reference to their leaving of their ways, their familiar surroundings where their customs were performed, their medicine, their hunting grounds, and their friends. When they had reached their new homes in Indian territory, their conversations were about their old homes, and they said, "We have started on the road that leads to our disappearance, and we are facing the evening of our existence and are nearly at the end of the trail that we trod when we were forced to leave our homes in Alabama and Georgia. In time, perhaps our own language will not be used, but that will be after our days." And the source is an interview with Saya Hicks, who was Creek, on November 17th, 1937. So Joyce shares that piece in her text, and I think it's a dramatic addition in the sense that it is words coming from 1937 about the forecasting of something and a shift in Indian country. Now, years later, Marie Batiste draws from poet Adrienne Rich, who's in her essay, Invisibility in the Academe, Rich says, "When someone with the authority of a teacher describes the world and you are not in it, there is a moment of psychic disequilibrium, as if you looked in a mirror and saw nothing." So let's consider these words. The first voice from 1937 and the second from 1984. Saya Hicks spoke of elders who envisioned their ways, their customs, their medicines, their hunting grounds, their friends, as disappearing. And less than 50 years later, Rich's poem suggests that for the authoritative voice in the classroom, a disappearance has indeed happened. And yet the student, in all of their invisible uncertainty or certainty, is sitting right there, present. Indigenous peoples are right here. Indigenous peoples are present. This conundrum of looking in the mirror is one that is lived out for Indigenous students even today. There is a perceived disappearance of Indigenous ontologies, epistemologies, medicine, foodways, and the people themselves. A disappearance of their minds and souls, as Batiste would suggest. Harjo's appointment as the United States Poet Laureate, the first Indigenous person to hold such a post, is political, the New York Times stated in 2019. Her post is, quote, "a reminder to those who view America as a white nation, that we are nothing of the sort." What has been done, what is being done, what needs to be done to reclaim Indigenous ways of being? First, an acknowledgement. And to open such an event like this, as sharing a territorial acknowledgement, is one tiny step towards that acknowledgement. But it should be understood that according to Batiste, modern society has no idea about the worldview within Aboriginal consciousness. That's quite a claim, no idea. No idea about the worldview within our Aboriginal consciousness. So what do I mean by acknowledgement? Acknowledge that European ancestors stole this continent. European ancestors contributed to the disappearance of Indigenous ways of being. And acknowledgement that we are all collectively sitting at an apex of a mountain of consequences but we remain silent and in the dark. What do I mean by this? Leaning on Batiste again, she asserts our children's future's planet is not secure. We all have contributed to its insecurity. How have we done this? By relying on the knowledge and skills we obtain in school curricula built on a foundation of Western Eurocentric models of learning. Such models that disconnect us from the land, the water, the universe. Additionally, we instead drown ourselves in the distractions of current day technologies while leaning on this pedestal of future innovations and ignore ancient ways of knowing. I want to insert a little story here. As Marty mentioned, I have successfully, and trust me, my success in grant writing is built on a foundation of failure. Trust me, it's pretty concrete foundation of failure to get to the point of being a successful grant writer. At one point, during my first award from the National Science Foundation, I was invited, like other principal investigators, to go to Washington, D.C. and meet with other grant awardees and individuals from the National Science Foundation. And on the stage, this grant that I wrote was about bringing diversity into STEM education. And my argument was we need to increase Indigenous women voices in STEM education. And because the conference that I was at in DC was for this particular grant calling to diversify STEM education, it was a very great surprise to me when I looked up at the morning session and everyone on the stage was white. And I'm thinking to myself, all right, I gotta take a picture of this to make sure. So I took my phone, 300 people in this room. You know those tables, 8, 10 people around the tables, dozens and dozens of these tables. I'm in the very, very back, because I like to be close to the coffee in the morning. I'm in the very, very back, and I run all the way down to the middle and all the way down the middle aisle to the front, and I take a picture with my phone, and I run all the way back to the back and back over to the corner near my seat near the coffee. And I sent this picture to my, for those of you who know, very Finnish-American husband, and who says, they're all white. And I said, okay, it's not just me. And so as the meeting progressed, one of the scholars that were there was talking very passionately about working with the Inuit people of Nunavut. And I'm listening and I'm like, why aren't they here? Why aren't they on that stage? And I couldn't contain myself, so when it was time for question and answer, I'm all but 5'0". I stand on my chair and take the microphone and I say, but where are the people from Nunavut? Where are the Inuit voices? This meeting here is a foundation of Western academic education, and just as we have heard, we need more seats to the table, we need more table leaves on the table to expand for more seats to be added to the table. We need to have an Indigenous way of teaching, Indigenous way of communicating and delivering this knowledge. It's not simply about more brown people in white lab coats. And about this time, I'm kind of starting to shake because I'm realizing I've had the microphone for a long time. And I'm thinking I'm never going to get another penny from National Science Foundation again in my life. I sit down. After the whole morning presentation, a number of people come up to me and want my card. And I'm just sort of like, kind of, a little awestruck at my own self for what I had just done. And I received a call from a number of months later, I received a call from a gentleman from Puerto Rico, and he says, I was given your name by a program officer at NSF, and she says we need to talk. And I realized that the beautiful trouble that my standing on a chair at an NSF meeting caused allowed me to connect with this gentleman from Puerto Rico and other scholars from California and DC, and we now have a multi-year project that's looking at how to include indigenous ways of thinking with computing, of all things, and looking towards sustainable means of computing and indigenous ways of design with computing, not just in the production and the delivery, but the whole 9 yards. And additionally, I'm just going to add here, I've talked to them about the importance of data colonialism, because media scholar Nick Coldry, who is with the Oxford School of Economics, has said we need to rely on indigenous studies scholars because they've been fighting colonialism for 400, 500 years. We need to look to them on how to fight data colonialism. And I'm like, fell out of my seat. So I feel very privileged that I was able to cause a bit of beautiful disruption at that meeting. But back to Harjo and the National Endowment for the Arts, of who I will never tick off. I love these people. Batiste suggests, I'm going to go back to Marie Batiste, who is our editor of Reclaiming Indigenous Voice and Vision, and she says, elders and others who can pass Aboriginal languages and cultures should be directly involved in the education system. Yet, seldom has any government, whether that be U.S., Canada, provincial, state, seldom has any government confronted the educational biases in modern thought or educational practices that exclude them from this role. What is unfolding to cause a shift towards reclamation? Batiste offers our people are slowly coming to the understanding that poverty and oppression are not their fault and are not the result of their language, consciousness, or culture. As Grace Shalier has taught at Northern Michigan University for the past 14 years in her class, History of Indian Boarding School Education, Indian boarding schools in the United States and residential schools in Canada were around for approximately a century, and it is taking decades since their closing for some Indigenous people to get this point, that they are visible in this world. Their languages are still here in this world. James Henderson, Cherokee, who, by the way, he and Marie Batiste are married, and I've actually heard them introduced at a lecture as the Jay-Z and Beyonce of Native Studies. James Henderson, Cherokee, another notable contributor in Reclaiming Indigenous Voice and Vision, remarks, to acquire freedom in the decolonized and the de-alienated other, the colonized must break their silence and struggle to retake possession of their humanity. This shift is not merely about being visible. It is about a reclamation of humanity, being visible and being heard on Indigenous terms. Now here I want to return to Harjo's book and the poem Exile of Memory. I will say with some of these poems, I'm only going to be sharing parts of the poem, not all of her work, and no disrespect to any of these folks, but a particular, I'm hoping to draw points out of them, so I may or may not read the whole poem. So this is Exile of Memory, and my Kindle says it is on page 6. Do not return. We were warned by one who knows things. You will only upset the dead. They will emerge from the spiral of little houses, lined up in the furrows of marrow, and walk the land. There will be no place in memory for what they see, the highways, the houses, the stores of interlopers, perched over the blood fields where the dead last stood. And then what? You with your words in the enemy's language. Do you know how to make a peaceful road through human memory? And what of angry ghosts of history? Then what? Harjo's lines, and then what, you with your words in the enemy's language. Her poem does continue, but I want to pause and focus on this questioning the use of what she calls the enemy's language. And it should be noted that a previous edited anthology with Gloria Bird was titled Reinventing the Enemy's Language. Joy Harjo and Gloria Bird worked on that together and was originally released in 1988. I wonder if Harjo has since rethought her suggestion to reinvent the enemy's language to reclaiming Indigenous language instead. Moving to Batiste, who asserts Aboriginal languages are the basic media for the transmission and survival of Aboriginal consciousness, culture, literatures, histories, religions, political institutions, and values. The basic media of transmission and survival, not just of Aboriginal culture, but of Aboriginal consciousness. Not just of Aboriginal histories, but of Aboriginal political institutions and values. Batiste offers that Aboriginal languages exist in pockets. They are secured by certain families in collective community consciousness. Now, I have witnessed this to be the case within the Anishinaabe communities. Even though many schools in the region, whether they be K-12 schools, tribal colleges, universities such as NMU, are offering these classes, we are relying on elders and families who, whether from the wholeness and bigness of their heart, are warriors to keep those languages alive, and it is their task hereditarily to do that, I don't know. But I have witnessed that there are elders and there are families and there are collectives working quietly outside of the academic realm in these communities to keep those languages alive. And yes, for the reasons that Batiste mentions. A number of years ago, approximately 2010, I was attending Hannahville's summer powwow in June. There, Eddie Benton-Benea was one of the MCs, and those of you may know him as the author of the Mishomis book. Eddie Benton-Benea said on the mic, "We are 26 years away from losing Anishinaabe Moment." This comment really struck out to me because of the preciseness in the years. He didn't say approximately 25 or 30. He stated with a sort of confidence, 26 years. And I regret not writing that all down right away, but regardless, I am watching the years go by. What am I doing to protect and help teach Indigenous language? If this is the basic medium of communication of values, political thought, histories, why isn't even our own curriculum at Northern Michigan University being taught in Anishinaabe Moment? I mean, it's taught in English. We have classes, but I'm talking about the rest of the conversations. Why aren't they in Anishinaabe Moment? Later on in the same poem from Harjo, Exile of Memory, in the complex, here there is a singing tree. It sings of the history of the trees here. It sings of Mohanwe, who stood with his warrior friends on the overlook staring into the new town erected by illegal residents. It sings of the Civil War camp, the bloodied, the self-righteous, and the forsaken. It sings of atomic power and the rise of banks whose spires mark the worship places. The final verse is always the trees. They will remain. Linda Hogan, who also contributed to the text Reclaiming Indigenous Voice and Vision, states, "There are communications that take place on a level that goes deeper than our somewhat limited human spoken languages. These inner forms of communication are perhaps the strongest core of ourselves. And there is even more a deep moving underground language in us. Its currents pass between us and the rest of nature." Now, this type of education moves well beyond the scope of the academic classroom. In her excerpt above, Harjo's poems could in fact be more metaphorical and literal, She honors the singing tree and the brutal history it retells by stating that they, such trees, will always hold the final verse. They will remain. I wonder, is the tree still in the form of a tree with roots, or is it in the form of a book as paper, or is it in a fire burning where the sounds of the fire interpret the songs of that tree? While the book may be seen by society as the medium of communication, it is here that Indigenous consciousness recognizes the multiple ways that that tree can indeed communicate. Linda Hogan additionally offers that what we, Indigenous people, really are searching for is a language that heals. One that takes the side of the amazing and fragile life on our life-giving earth. It is a language of creation, of divine fire, a language that goes beyond the strict borders of scientific inquiry and right into the heart of mystery itself. Harjo, too, suggests in her poem, later on in the text entitled Our Knowledge is Based, our knowledge is based on the origin stories of land, genealogy, and ancestors. If you know the branches of the tree of relationship between tribal clans and family members, then you know who you are, said the panther to its cubs. In American Indian traditions, healers are often called interpreters. Linda Hogan states, because they are the ones who are able to hear the world and pass its wisdoms. They are the ones who return to the heart of creation. So in midst of weaving these scholarly words, beautiful poetic words together, what of the teacher and the invisible student? If the world exists, does not the student exist? What of the mirror that doesn't share a reflection of that student in that classroom? What of that pregnant moment of uncertainty in one's recognition of their invisibility? To that moment, I remember this quote from Lakota Ruth Hopkins. Every native born into this world is a victory against colonialism and attempted genocide. You are the resistance. You are hope made flesh. The student's reflection may not exist in a mirror in the school, but her ancestors' reflections along with her own reside in a more familiar space. And it is here, as I start to close, I will share one of my favorite poems from Joy Harjo that was in a collection from nearly 3 decades already ago entitled The Woman Fell from the Sky. This is the poem entitled Perhaps the World Ends Here. The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared, set on the table. So it has been since creation, and it will go on. We chase chickens or dogs away from it. Babies teethe at the corners. They scrape their knees under it. It is here that children are given instruction on what it means to be human. We make men at it. We make women. At this table, we gossip, recall enemies and the ghost of lovers. Our dreams drink coffee with us as they put their arms around our children. They laugh with us at our poor falling down selves, and as we put ourselves back together once again at the table. This table has been a house in the rain, an umbrella in the sun. Wars have begun and ended at this table. It is a place to hide in the shadow of terror, a place to celebrate the terrible victory. We have given birth on this table and have prepared our parents for burial here. At this table we sing with joy, with sorrow. We pray of suffering and remorse. We give thanks. Perhaps the world will end at the kitchen table while we are laughing and crying, eating of the last sweet bite. Miigwech, and thank you for for the patience in listening to my thoughts on reclaiming Indigenous voice and vision as it pertains to the poetry of Joy Harjo. And with that, I would like to open it up for questions that, if I don't know the answer to, I'll lie. I'm just kidding. I would love to have a discussion about some of these thoughts. They, as I wove them together, you know, I'm trying to like make this sort of quilted picture out of words from multiple people, and I hope some form of a picture arose from that. Thank you.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions? I'm not going to run around with the microphone, so.
Yes, Dr. Amy Hamilton from NMU's English Department, who's speaking in a few weeks. Hello.
Hi, April, that was brilliant, wonderful.
Thank you.
So much.
Oh, miigwech. Thank you.
It was really, I'm so glad that I made it here tonight to hear it. So when you're the weaving together of voices, what struck me about that is that, so earlier today I was revisiting Joy's book, and one of the things that was really standing out to me is the way the book itself is weaving together voices. So not only is she directly quoting people, like in the pieces that you read,
Yes.
but she's also recalling other writers less directly. There's a place, for example, where she connects to a Silko poem. And there's another place where she connects to, I think, one of Simon Ortiz's pieces, and of course, Scott Momaday.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that piece of reclaiming vision and voice, that kind of pulling together community voices and how that works.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. That's a great observation and a great question. I think for myself, it's a little odd to be standing here alone on this stage, in the sense that Indigenous ways of practicing and being a part of a gathering is so much an interconnected collective of voices. And I think whenever I have gone to ceremonies or gatherings, you know, I've heard elders repeatedly say over the years, it's not about one person at the podium, of which I am, right? It's not about one person at the podium. Each one of us have knowledge to contribute to that circle. And none of us know whose voice might need to impact us in that precise moment and context. So paying attention to everyone in that circle, be they the smallest child or the most sage elder, everyone has something to contribute. And so I think that by working to braid together these voices is my way of attempting to practice that collective sharing in a manner that is, for me, a reminder of those gatherings, of those circles where people come together and give of themselves, each one. You know, I've been in those circles too, where like there might be teens and they're kind of shy, be glad to pass it on, you know. But we go around a couple of times and then they hear other people talk, and then they'll get that courage, right? They'll get that flame growing a little bit as more and more people talk, and they'll have something to say. And they too, you know, should be seen as having something to offer. All of us have something to offer. This is just, with humility, my one moment in time with the mic, right? So that was my purpose, and I hope that was, I hope I did it justice. Pretty much. Yes. What's your name, please?
My name is Darlene Allen.
Hi, Darlene. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. And there are actually several of us here from the League of Women Voters.
Okay,
And
excellent.
We are a very new organization. And we are just kind of learning our path, learning our road. I think within our League culture, which is primarily white women, older white women, we have, I think, a very similar philosophy. forward to expanding that and including other voices. And we definitely recognize how important that is. And so I'm really glad you're here, and I'm really excited for this month. And any suggestions that you have, I mean, we have, as a group, said the best thing we can do is join in Indigenous programs and ceremonies and projects and learn. And that's sort of our current path.
Yes.
But we're really looking forward to including different voices in different ways. And so thank you for being here. I don't really have a question.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And yes, Joe and some other folks came by our center not too long ago and inquired about the Northern Michigan University's recently unveiled sign, which contains our official university land acknowledgement. And I think, others in the community, Fresh Coast Film Festival leaders and even the Democratic Party leaders have contacted me and others at the center to learn more about what does that mean for them and their organization to have a land acknowledgement and make such a land acknowledgement. And I think that speaks to the visibility/invisibility that I think there is a shift in that there is a visibility that is starting to take place among many communities that we need to acknowledge this is Indian land, that we are all upon, and we work upon, and reside upon, and live upon. And as I was stating, sometimes it's a step, it's a tiny step, but it's a step in the right direction. And so I would say keep moving forward with those steps with humility, and learn more and saying what do I need? What is it I need to know? And I think part of the challenge is you don't know what you don't know, so you don't know what to ask, right? A lifetime student, I've been there. But I think those tiny steps and walking with humility, those things will become apparent, be made apparent. And a good place to start, I think, is exactly what we're doing tonight, is having these community conversations around a mega voice that is Joe Harjo, who has, for decades now, contributed music, art, poetry, performance, and who has, with her words, kind of created that shakening that has allowed for that visibility to take place.
April?
Yes.
Beth Atkins?
Hello, Matt.
Hi. She knows me. We know each other.
It's been a minute, but I'm
Yeah,
glad to see you.
So, how can I find an Anishinaabe class around here?
So there, as far as the community classes go, I'm not certain if there are people in the local community. Clearly there are at the university, but I would even say start with YouTube.
Okay.
I mean, I'm watching a guy from Red Lake like every other day. West Virginia, props. Okay, so I'm watching this because anything I can do. There are strategies that my language teacher shares, that it's about reading, it's about writing, it's about listening, it's about speaking. And the listening is the hardest part because there aren't Anishinaabe Moment speakers running around everywhere, right? But I'm leveraging YouTube and its availability to listen to speakers, share that, and just even just doing that, I think is a start. If anybody was interested, Dr. Judd Sojourn and Leora Lancaster have been doing great work with language classes on our campus for a number of years. So much so that we have proposed to, I have to think back about this. This was a grant we wrote to Nottawasapi Tribe downstate in expanding language classes and learning to even upper division, more serious students interested in documentation of language and translation of language. We'd love to see students be taking classes all through their undergraduate and actually work into a graduate program in the future. So there's efforts going on everywhere, but I'm also very mindful of we're all getting to a certain point and then there's stoppage, right? And so how do we keep moving moving forward to that point of intermediate language learner to, on the brink of fluency. And it's going to take years. It's going to take time, no doubt about it. But I've personally dedicated myself, even amidst everything else Margie mentioned in my opening. I am taking classes through a community program due to connections that I have with Lac du Flambeau in Wisconsin. So thank goodness for Zoom, right? I don't have to drive there. But
So how do I even begin to search? What do I type in the search line?
I would just write Ojibwe language.
Okay.
So the gentleman from Red Lake, his YouTube channel is entitled Ojibwe Language Table.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Language.
I gotta get back to the basics, right? April, stop talking. Just tell me what to type in the search line.
Well, because it's so big.
It is big.
So big.
You're right.
You try to come down to how
Yep.
do I type it?
Yep.
How do I type it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nancy. Ani. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm among the lucky ones who have taken one of those Anishinaabe ones. Anishinaabe is still a mouthful for me.
Especially with a mask on.
Yeah. Language from the URLA chapter, and I wonder if you could talk about what you were saying about learning a whole different consciousness through language, because that was one of the, even though I've grown up in a traditionally Norwegian family close to the earth, the language, the Anishinaabe language, it just has it presents a whole different perspective, like the use of verbs, and like, this is the hillside where something grows, and a sentence will grow out of it, and like grandmother is the one that keeps things, we talk about like some specifics that embody the consciousness that you're talking about, because it's so beautiful.
It is, and you've already given me a lot to start there, right? With so many of those examples that you gave. I think there is no such thing as the noun grandmother. It's my grandmother, your grandmother, their grandmother, our grandmother. That being is always in relation. And so I think that speaks again to that interconnectivity of multiple voices instead of one person off by itself as grandma, right? Similarly, I think one of the experiences I'm grateful for in the past couple of years was joining Wayne Vallier over at Lac du Flambeau to make Wigwasa Jaman, which is a birch bark canoe. And although I don't want to necessarily go back and dig for spruce roots again, that's tough work. But the whole process of making that Wigwasa Jaman was, I was very fortunate to be a part of that. And he tells a story about the language associated with that name. And the story he tells is that the translation has to do with blowing a kiss. Now, why on earth would you blow a kiss in relation to a canoe? So what he's talking about is the pitch that's used to seal the bark. That you would go with your hand on the inside and you would go up to the canoe and if you could feel that breath on the other side, you needed more pitch to seal it up. So that intimate act with the bark, to blow it a kiss, Wigwasa Jaman, that is what that translation is that birch bark canoe, but it's not a canoe, right? Like it's the relationship of building that canoe. And the relationship of this is something that you need so well built that you have to put your mouth and breath into every bit of it to make sure that every piece of bark is sealed, because that's a big lake out there. There's big lakes in northern Wisconsin. You need that to survive. And that relationship is just that's just of how the language operates differently than as an object that you sit in and go across the lake with. You're gonna take that much more care with this canoe because it is about survival, but also because you've put so much time, energy, and work into it, and you have that intimate breath to life relationship to protect your life in checking it out to make sure it's satisfactory in its construction. That's one example. Joe, yes, I did see your hand up earlier. Hello.
There's a huge job, obviously, of reclaiming the language for the Anishinaabe and any other tribe. What do the people working with the language do about new objects, new activities, new
Yeah.
things in the world that
Sure.
we need to talk about?
I think that's some of the most, those are some of the most fun words, because they're kind of merging together existing understandings and building words. So, my favorite one, because we all work with computers every day, all day, translates into little brain box. I can't think of other ones right now, but I mean, that's what they do, is they piece together existing understandings to kind of describe, and I think those are some of the most, the modern technology under the modern thoughts and philosophies, those create some of the most interesting translations. Not everything can translate, obviously, hence the phrase lost in translation, right, for every language learner across multiple languages. But I do think that, there has been creative ways of people, I think, who are really, really, really skilled speakers, first speakers and skilled speakers, would be able to pick up based on the detailed description. So new learners, we have a lot more trouble. But when we hear the explanation, then it's a strategy for remembering it, right? So, yeah.
Any more questions?
I do want to acknowledge, I think that Joy Harjo includes language and song in her book, and I think that's also a real, it underlines the importance of Indigenous language to have our U.S. Poet Laureate not solely discussing experiences, discussing family, discussing history, but doing so by sharing the language, right? And I think that is again a real telling sign that our languages need to be heard just as Indigenous people need to be seen. I wish I could remember, I'm gonna have to look back at my notes, I heard somebody once say, don't you think the trees in the territory miss our songs? And that was something that really kind of stuck with me, that we also have a responsibility to learn that language, not just for our own selves and our community's well-being as a community of humans, but our community of space, that is Forest Nation or Water Being Nation or what have you. We owe it to them as well. I didn't even drink the water.
You didn't drink the water, that's okay. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. This is, being the NEA Big Read organizer has been one of the most humbling experiences, because I've just learned so much. And to be able to bring programs like this, important subjects, and bring a community conversation about this is so significant to me, and it's one of the greatest miracles this job has provided me. And we have some more miracles coming up for the NEA Big Read too. So next Monday, this Thursday, at the Joy Center in Ishpeming, Dr. Beverly Mathern is going to be reading and talking about the Acadian removal history in Louisiana. And that's also going to be available on YouTube. And then next Monday here in the community room again, we have Professor Amber Morso, who's going to be doing another keynote address. And her keynote address, the title of it is Worldviews Through Art Expression, Women Reconnecting Us to Our Home and Ancestors. And that's at 7 p.m. here. It's also going to be on YouTube, but we'd like to see you here. And then on November 8th, Dr. Amy Hamilton will be here in the community room, and she's going to be delivering a presentation on climate and American Indian literature. And November 10th, we have a bunch of other stuff going on in between all this as well. But November 10th, Dr. Marty Reinhardt from the Center for Native American Studies is going to be, it says in the brochure that it's in the community room here. It's not. It's over at the Marquette Regional History Center. That one is. And he is going to be talking about the removal histories of Indigenous people from their original lands. And then, of course, the big one, November 15th, we are going to have Joy Harjo joining us for a virtual reading and presentation. There's going to be a big party here. Marty Reinhardt's band is going to be here playing some tribal progressive music. And then at 7 p.m., I guess I'm going to sneak upstairs to my office and meet with Joy, and you'll be able to watch the whole presentation down here as a community, which is what we've been talking about, that it's not about sitting in your individual computer watching it, that it's more important that we do it as a community.
Will there be snacks?
There will not be snacks, I'm sorry. There's this little thing that's called COVID that sort of interferes with stuff like that right now. Hopefully in the future we will be able to do that. But just one other thing there, if you haven't got a copy of An American Sunrise yet, I have a few copies left. I had 200 at the beginning of all this. I'm down to like 10 or 15, which is fantastic. But there are some more copies back there. Also, there are evaluations back there for the NEA Big Read. I would appreciate it if you could take a moment to fill one of those out, because that helps us bring more programs like this to Peter White Public Library. I'm so excited. They just came up with the new list of books for the next NEA Big Read, and there's a lot of good choices. So I'm hoping that we can do something like this again very soon. But please join me in again thanking April, my friend, for doing this. Thank you all. Have a good night, and hopefully tomorrow night. I'm sure April doesn't mind me saying this because of Walt, but tomorrow night Blues Day Tuesday is here. So at 7, it starts at 7 o'clock. So come, we're gonna have some blues music, no snacks, but blues music. So please come. Thank you.
How can there be community without snacks? Eating together.
Right.
How can there